Well, meanwhile, as you saw over the weekend, our President, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been pleading for peace in the region as well, reiterating his call for humanitarian corridors to be opened. He concluded his working visit to Egypt with a request to the international community to do more in enabling the revival of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Yesterday, a new convoy of 20 trucks carrying humanitarian aid reached the war-torn Gaza Strip from Egypt's Rafah border crossing. The World Health Organization says around 100 trucks of the humanitarian aid are needed every day by the over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza who are barely surviving Israel's siege. Well, we're joined now by University of Johannesburg Professor Farid Esack. He is a researcher in the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Professor Esack, good evening to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. There are many different ways to look at the conflict in the Middle East. Some people see it as a colonial or anti-colonial struggle. Some see it through a political lens. But the issue of religion is clearly important. Is religion the dominant way in which we should understand this?
Well, I think that religion is never a useful way to look at things, although religion may play an important role in justification or in apologetics. It's like looking at the Northern Ireland question through the lenses of Catholic and Protestant. And that notion comes from the idea that people are essentially motivated by their religious beliefs. That, I'm afraid, it's not historically true, and the same applies to what we are witnessing in Palestine, Israel at the moment. Religion always serves as a secondary real impulse, but may emerge as the mascot for underlying conflicts or underlying tensions or underlying injustices.
Are you suggesting that people who use religion to motivate or to argue in favor of themselves and their followers should not really be doing that? Are you suggesting they're using it for their own ends?
Look, you know, I mean, religion can always be used in support of one's political cause. We saw this in the case of South Africa, where the Dutch Reformed Church was, in fact, the Nationalist Party at prayers. And then later you see how the role of religion gets shifted by liberation theologians, both in Christianity and in Islam. And so religion does serve sometimes as a useful mechanism and sometimes as a rather destructive mechanism. However, in all fairness, I mean, the truth is what is destructive, what is positive. This is often largely through the eyes of the beholder and the person engaging in such justification.
And I mean, most major religions that I'm aware of preach non-violence. They preach against violence. They preach that human life is sacred, and certainly what is sometimes referred to as the sort of people of the book, which would include both Judaism and Islam and Christianity, would all include that, wouldn't they?
Well, Stephen, I mean, that's really what most people would like to believe. And this is what people often, with due apologies to you, at a rather superficial level. The truth is that all of these religions that you have mentioned have successfully marshaled religious text and doctrine in support of war, in support of violence. And this may be decidedly unappealing to a casual viewer, but any historian of religion would not agree with your assumption. I mean, believers like to believe this, but that's not historically true, and neither is it theologically true, nor is it textually true. If you look at our religious texts of the faith, the people of the book, or other faiths, I mean, say, for example, Hindus and so on, I think that all of our texts has been successfully marshaled in the cause of in non-violent causes, let's put it that way.
There's an issue around the role of religion in someone's identity. And for some people, they may be religious, they may have grown up in a church, but religion plays a very small role in their identity. For other people, it may be, you know, maybe the dominant factor or a very, very big factor. They define themselves by their religious belief. Is that something we see maybe more in the Middle East than we do perhaps in this country. And where I'm going with this is that an identity founded on a religious belief can be very difficult to negotiate, whereas other elements of your identity you can sort of negotiate with other people. But a religious belief can sometimes, I think maybe, and I'm not an expert on this at all, as you can hear, Professor, can maybe make it harder to negotiate?
In some ways, I agree with you. For example, when you say that, no, my identity comes from God, and God is on my side, or God has given me this, or God, by virtue of my being in this religion, I have the right to argue for the dominance of my religion, either over the world or in a particular territory of the world. And so it does become problematic when you synonymize your identity with God, because God can't be wrong, and therefore I can't be wrong. And if I am in the army of God, or I am representing God, or if God has spoken to me, then there is little space for negotiation. But the truth is that many religious people do actually find ways of mediating that religious identity with their geography, with other concerns, universal human rights concerns, new understandings of the world that we see. For example, the question of environmental justice. And so this may not have been foregrounded in our religious identity 20, 30 years ago, but it may be now. And so actually, most religious groups, if not all, they do find ways of negotiating with harsh socio-economic roles around them, realities around them. Whether they do so sometimes as Johnny-come-latelys, or as, oh my God, we were wrong when we did this to other people. The case of the Dutch Reformed Church comes to mind again. So whether they come as, there is often, religious communities do find ways of negotiating realities around them, sometimes, as I said, or sometimes for better or for worse. And more specifically, Stephen, I'll be very quick on this in relation to what is unfolding in Palestine and Israel at the moment. There is, of course, on both sides, religious motivation that pushes people. I don't want to kind of rephrase this in terms of my own affiliations, but the whole idea, for example, that God spoke to us and God gave us His land. This makes it non-negotiable. And on the other hand, if God has willed us to establish Islam on the face of the earth, it does make it difficult to confront people like this theologically. But as I said, people do find ways, depending on political pressures around them, or economic pressures around them, or political rhetoric sometimes. People do kind of move, the religious people would not want to say this, but people do adjust with the times and the various pressures that they face.
It's interesting because, sometimes I suspect that people forget their own agency in this. And to use the Dutch Reformed Church or the NGK as a kind of useful example, because I think people have been looking at the Middle East and looking at South Africa, and we in South Africa see the conflict and think, well, we went through a period of conflict, and we managed to improve our lives. They're not perfect by any means, but we managed to make things much better than they were through negotiation. And there are key people who did this. And one of the people that maybe an example of someone who had agency and rejected what he had been taught was perhaps Beyers Naudé, who, as I'm sure you're aware, came from the NGK, would have been told, would have grown up in a sort of theology that justified apartheid, and turned against that, and then was able to sort of use his theological understanding, change the theological understanding, to try and influence other people, to try and lead his flock in another direction. Of course, the apartheid government moved against him. Would that be an example of what you're talking about, this ability to change your understanding?
Absolutely. I don't think that one gets a finer example than Beyers Naudé in South Africa, who in my eyes is the greatest prof that South Africa had seen. Somebody who in some ways he privileged his own position as a white person, as a Dutch Reformed person, and whatever that meant before Beyers's testimony at Kottersloo on the edges here, just around the corner at the University of Johannesburg. So yes, in the middle of this, you can find your own road to Damascus experience and say, oh my God, I have been wedded to my religious community's colonization of God, my religious community's colonization of religion. I can read the scriptures in another way. That requires, of course, an immense amount of courage, an enormous amount of integrity that Beyers did indeed exhibit. But Stephen, I think that one must also be careful, you know, that one doesn't reduce the larger questions of say colonization or resistance to it to simply the personal, like, you know, oh my gosh, you know, if only this country or that country had a Madiba. Wait, you know, you can't reduce history to once upon a time there was a bad king, and then a good king came along, and then he slayed the bad king, and we all lived happily ever after. That's a rather simplistic view, I think, of transformation and the role of religion in challenging injustices. There are systemic things, there are movements, and this is why, you know, we should be careful that we don't ascribe to leaders, including somebody as somebody of the stature of Beyers Nudi, and take it away from the political and social formations and the agency of our communities who were able to resist. So that's my take, I mean, on the value of, it's like really, I mean, it's a bit of a problem, you know, oh gosh, you know, Mandela liberated us. Why don't the Palestinians have a Mandela? Or why, no, I mean, I was talking about the Irish thing, you know, Jerry Adams. I think it's helpful to pay homage to all of these people, but the larger issues of conflict and war and so on, I think we need to find socio-political agents and ascribe to movements to movements their victories and failures.
Professor, I think we're just warming up. Thank you very much indeed for your wisdom. I really do appreciate the time.